what we are experiencing, in my view, at this time in America, is the cultivation of ingratitude.
Yeah, I agree.
And that, as I say often, you get a BA in ingratitude, you get a master's in ingratitude, and a PhD in ingratitude.
And a professorship, too.
So Dennis, the phrase
right.
the phrase that you just used, the cultivation of ingratitude, this ties in so beautifully with the text in chapter 11, specifically because what is it that the Jews do differently this time than before, right? When they're asking for water, when they're asking for food. Before, it was like, okay, they're actually thirsty. Okay, they're actually hungry, right? The language in the Bible here is really fascinating. So it says in chapter 11, verse 4, it says, the rabble in their midst began to have strong cravings. Okay, now the actual Hebrew is that they began to hitavu ta'ava, right? It's a doubling of the word. Whenever that happens, that's an intensification in Hebrew. So the basic idea is they are cultivating a craving, right? It's the craving that's to blame. They're not saying we want meat because we're hungry for meat. They're saying we are going to cultivate ingratitude. We're going to cultivate a craving, right? And so that's what makes Moses so angry.
It's kind of a consumerism.
Exactly, and you actually have to cultivate in your own mind a feeling that you have a lack of something, which is basically, I mean, human beings have a tendency to do this, right? We cultivate a craving for the taboo, and so as we stretch the boundaries of society, we look for new taboos to violate in order so that we can have a craving for that. And so that's what Moses is responding to. He's saying, what you're actually requesting is not something that you want, it's something that you've cultivated a craving for, which is why after the plague breaks out, this place is literally named Kivrot HaTa'ava. It's called the Graves of the Craving.
That the suffering of the people isn't true suffering. That's the point you're making, is that it's cultivated suffering.
This is right.
And cultivated resentful suffering.
Right. And this is where Moses really begins to turn on the people in a dramatic way. Because before it was like, okay, I get it. You were slaves in Egypt. You have no sense of what it is to be a civil society. You have no sense of what it is to be a good person. And I'm even willing to stand up for you to the point where when you commit an act of idolatry directly after Revelation, I'll stand with you because I understand who you are. What he doesn't understand, and where Moses cannot deal with it, is you guys went out of your way to cultivate a thing that you didn't have just so that you could want the thing and then claim that you wanted to go back to Egypt for the thing.
Well, that's a kind of claiming the virtues of victimization, and so what's happening here is something like this. So we've already established that the Israelites have now established a state, and it's kind of functional, and that means if it's a functional state, your basic suffering has already been mitigated, and so then you might say one of the temptations of people in a functional state after their basic sufferings have been mitigated is to cultivate the suffering for the point of victimization and the moral demand that victimization...
Or just also the problem of satiety. And I don't know if you said that in English, but the idea, the problem of desire itself, in the King James Version, it says a lust, like among them fell a lusting. And so it's this sense that, you just... for your own sake, you want to eat that snack food, you want that extra thing.
It's a cultivation of craving.
Yeah, it's a cultivation of craving, that's right.
Medieval Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart was reputed to have said, I don't think you can find the exact quotation, but he's reputed to have said, if you have one prayer, then that should be gratitude.
Right.
Which is, I think,
by the way, this is also the gap between...
Yeah, and the reason it's a virtue is because it's something you should practice. Like, we should note this. It's like, it's not that easy to be grateful because life does involve pain and suffering. And so you can justify... It's easy to rationally justify resentment. It truly is. But it's extremely toxic, and it's tied up in a strange way with deceit and arrogance, too, which is something I won't get into. But there is a lost notion, I would say, in our culture that we've lost the notion that virtue is something to cultivate. Like, gratitude and courage are both difficult. There's all sorts of reasons to be timid and ungrateful. And it's to work against the evidence in some way that constitutes the core of the virtue. And so I've talked to my wife about this a lot. She's been very much trying to cultivate a sense of gratitude, and it's a practice that she's engaging in to try to observe in every situation what miraculous gift she's been given within the context of that situation. Of course, sometimes that's extraordinarily difficult if the situation is dire, but you could ask yourself, you could abstract away from that and say, well, even if the situation is dire, is it so self-evident that the best stance to prepare yourself still wouldn't be one of gratitude? It seems to me that that's a very hard argument to shake.
W.H. Jordan, one of his last lines of a poem, let all your thinks be thanks. But in the Torah, isn't it right that you've got a trio? You've got gratitude, memory, remembering, and history. Again and again they're told, remember, remember, remember. It's when we forget we're ungrateful. And the Jewish festivals are not festivals of nature like the Canaanites. They're festivals of history. God did this for you then.
Is that part of, do you suppose that remembering is associated thematically with the notion of honoring your mother and your father? Because to remember is to remember the traditions of the past. Well, yeah.
What you owe.
One of the things that's really struck me about our modern culture, especially the culture that we pass on to young people, is that we don't stress the necessity of gratitude. We view the past as, well, a patriarchal tyranny, let's say, and there are elements of the past that are both patriarchal and tyrannical. But my sense always is, well, yeah, but if you plug in your toaster in the wall, it works. And when you go outside, the houses aren't burning down and there aren't riots everywhere.
So if the pagans depended on nature, we depend on technology.
In order to cultivate a craving, the Bible seems to be pointing out, in order to really, truly cultivate a craving, you have to rewrite history. And so that's actually what happens here. It says that they start to cultivate a craving for me.
Here.
That's what I'm saying. So because what the text actually says, right?
No,
immediately
I mean here
after
in America.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. So the text, right, exactly. So the text says that right after the people begin to cultivate a craving, listen to the way that the Bible characterizes the Israelite complaint, right? They say, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost." And they were slaves, but the way they remember that is it didn't cost us anything because we didn't have to buy it. Right?
Well, the same thing happened with post-Soviet nostalgia.
That's right.
Exactly.
Remember the good old days under Stalin. It's like
the part of this.
Stalin
to me,
is positively regarded by a majority of Russians to this day.
For me, what's interesting is that the ingratitude leads immediately to regression, and there's the Jungian term I always forget, which I ask you, that's regression to a prior archetype. What's that name when you...
Oh yes, I'll remember that in a moment, yeah. Retrogressive restoration of the persona.
Right, it's basically like midlife crisis, in a way. It's like you're in this time of change, you're getting close to something, right? And you're out of, like, I think of this image a lot in terms of, like, you're a hermit crab on the bottom of the ocean and you've outgrown your shell, right? And you're scuttling out, but you're naked and you're vulnerable and predators swirl everywhere. And you don't even know if there's another shell that's out there that you can fill. It's very much the state right now of the Israelites. And you have to have faith to keep going, that not only will you find something out there, but that it will be more capacious, that you can fill it in a greater way. And so many people seek to kind of scuttle back to the thing that they ill-fit before and kind of cram themselves back into something.
Well, that was a pre-existent state of order, right? So there is a validity. There is a validity in nostalgia for the past, and the validity is, well, we weren't dying then, and that's the truth. And so,
but it's not a fit that you can wear again. It's like
that's the danger.
It's the siren song of a midlife crisis, let's say. If I just go back and do this over again, it was better.
That would be the pathology of an unthinking conservatism. Right,
but they're misremembering.
That worship of the past.
Yeah, they're misremembering. That's the point. It's not just, oh, we survived, or at least we were alive back then. It was like we had all this extraordinary food. And I think a little bit later, they actually describe this kind of a shocking verse to me, Egypt as the land of milk and honey, flowing with milk and honey. I think that's right, isn't it? It's just an extraordinary kind of, it's not just forgetfulness or misremembering.
It's the projection of the destination into the past.
Exactly. The destination they're journeying to, as it were, is just flipped around as if they're heading back. Yeah.
So now the Israelites have a state, and now they're tempted by ingratitude, and the ingratitude makes them murmur, and the murmuring is, in a sense, calling forth another tyrant, and that's what Moses is objecting to. He's saying, now the burden is too great on me again. And God returns to this notion of subsidiary responsibility once again, right? So to even address this issue of emergent, lustful ingratitude, it's the same remedy.
I just want to point out one thing, just for an image and people to understand the relationship of this. I keep pointing to this fractal structures. I want people to realize the Bible is so coherent. It's crazy. You know, this idea of they want to eat flesh, that they want to eat animals. And in the hierarchy of things, you know, the animals are on the outside. The animals are that which is being sacrificed. They're on the edge. And so God burns the edge of the camp. It's almost like, that's what they want, and that's where the fire comes. It comes from to the edge of the camp, kind of singes the edge. And so there's that, because you'll see later an image of the Miriam who is too pure. But here you have this sense in which what they want is the animality, like they want to dive into the flesh. And the result of that is this,
gluttony.
But the result is something like cutting off some part of the edge, a kind of circumcision, you could say, like cutting off the flesh.
And Jordan, in accordance with what you're saying, which is this kind of attempt to, the desire for a tyrant that they want that's borne out by this, look at the language that's used where the people are, right? So it says, Moses heard the people weeping, clan by clan, each one at his tent's opening. The last time you saw that language is when Moses was in the tent of meeting by himself, right before the reestablishment of the tabernacle. He's out there, they're each at their tent's opening, and they're looking this way so they're treating Moses like, you're the tyrant, give us what we want, right? We want the person who can provide us the meat. And Moses saying, I don't want this. Why are you giving this to me?
It's too much for him.
It's too much for me. I can't do
again.
this. And God says, okay, fine. So then the answer is that I'm going to take some of your, it's, again, more tragedy for Moses. The glory that I've put upon you that comes from my relationship with you, I'm now going to spread to these 70 elders who are going to help you carry the burden. And it kind of gets worse from here, actually.
And the image, what's interesting is what the image ends up being is something that God promised in the curse, which is that you will eat and you will not be satisfied. And so then it's almost, God is going to say, oh, you want meat? Oh, you're going to have so much meat that you're going to be disgusted of it. Like you're going to loathe it by the amount of meat that you're going to have.
Which, by the way, is actually pretty good therapy. Like if you ever have a kid who really
has a craving,
you just like have a family friend, yeah, exactly, who did this with cigarettes, found their kid smoking, and was like, okay, here's an entire pack. You're going to smoke this entire pack right now. Kid never smoked again.
That's right.